Brand New Day premiered last week, and I had a chance to see it over the weekend. And after I saw the movie, I received the same question from several people. They were wondering what I, as the local Marvel expert, thought they should watch before seeing Brand New Day. Now, that is a really good question, and I feel like there are several ways to answer it. At this point, the MCU movies and TV shows are very interconnected, and there's a lot of them, so I understand why it's hard for a casual fan to navigate where to start. Now, I think that usually they give you enough information to understand each of the MCU films without having to do your homework and watch everything else first, but you're gonna appreciate it a lot more if you have some of the background knowledge to really support your understanding. My opinion is that you should rewatch or watch some things to prepare for Brand New Day, but definitely don't rewatch everything. There's only a few things you really need to review. In this video, I'm gonna give you 3 suggestions for what to watch before going to see the movie, and you can choose which one of those works best for you, depending on A, which movies you've seen before, and B, how many movies do you have time to watch first. Locations for a brief presentation about why this is so complicated. So, we're looking at Spider-Man Brand New Day, and we're trying to figure out what we need to watch before it by seeing what dependencies it has, what movies it depends on. So, of course, the first things first, Spider-Man Brand New Day is definitely a sequel. No Way Home, definitely have to watch that one. No Way Home is part of this trilogy. It definitely depends on Spider-Man Homecoming and Spider-Man Far From Home. But you can also see these other dependencies going out. What's that about? Well, now we're looking at all of the things that give us context about MCU Spider-Man. These are all of the movies where he makes an appearance. So if you want to follow his trajectory in the MCU, you definitely need to start with Captain America Civil War, then Homecoming, then Avengers Infinity War and Endgame, then the other Spider-Man Home trilogy movies, and then Brand New Day. But there's still arrows going around. Oh, and did I mention we need to know what's going on in these movies to understand some of the characters who show up in this multiversal, beautiful film, Spider-Man No Way Home. We need to see the Spider-Man trilogy, the one from 2002, and we need to see the Amazing Spider-Man duology. Understand those characters. And then, in order to truly appreciate Avengers Infinity War, Avengers Endgame, and Captain America Civil War, we have to know all of these other MCU heroes. And look at that. Oh, and I forgot one more thing. There's some characters who show up in these ones who you might need to know about who weren't in Avengers Infinity War and Endgame. So I've added a few more movies and TV shows that you should probably watch to get the gist of those characters too. That's a lot of movies and TV shows. Which ones do you watch? And that's what this video will help you decide. Okay, here is my list of recommendations. I have 3 options depending on if you have time to watch 1 movie, that's it, 3 movies, or 5 or 6 movies. Those of you who only have time to watch 1 movie, I'm gonna call you the refresher group. You just need a quick refresher. Those of you who have time to watch 3 movies, I'm gonna call you the homies, the spider homies. You'll see why in a second. And those of you who have time for 5 to 6 movies, I'm gonna call you the spider stans, because of course you have more time to be a super fan about Spider-Man. So, option 1, if you just have time for 1 movie, then watch No Way Home. If you have not seen No Way Home before, you should watch No Way Home before going to see Brand New Day. Make sure you watch that. Brand New Day is very much a sequel to No Way Home. This is actually the group that I fall in, mostly because I have seen almost all of the movies that Spider-Man is in the MCU so many times that I 1, didn't really have time to review all of them first. 2, it was actually kind of a spontaneous thing to even go last Saturday. And 3, I've seen all of those a lot of times and I know pretty well what happened in them. Okay, for my homies, those of you who have time for 3 movies, then you should watch the Spider-Man Home trilogy. That's not what it's officially called, but I'm gonna refer to it as such because it makes sense. There's Spider-Man Homecoming, Spider-Man Far From Home, and Spider-Man No Way Home. All of the Tom Holland Spider-Man movies that have home in the title. and that's why I called you the homies. Then option 3, if you have time for 5 to 6 movies, then I would recommend watching all of the ones where Tom Holland's Spider-Man makes an appearance. So that would be these 6 movies. We've got Civil War, we've got Homecoming, we've got Avengers Infinity War, we've got Avengers Endgame, we have Far From Home, and we have No Way Home. And if you only have time for 5 and not all 6, then don't worry too much about Civil War. He has a pretty small role in that one. Now, if you have not seen any of the movies that I've just listed, I would recommend at the very least being a homie and watching the Spider-Man Home trilogy, because you do want to have that background with Tom Holland Spider-Man. Don't skip right to No Way Home if you haven't seen Homecoming and Far From Home first. Now, some people may be asking at this point, in preparation for watching No Way Home, which is in preparation for watching Brand New Day, should I watch the Tobey Maguire or Andrew Garfield Spider-Man movies? Now, that could be a good idea, but it's 5 more movies. That doubles our homework. Since we're mainly preparing for Brand New Day, I would say not to worry about it. Instead, in preparation, I am going to talk about what you need to know from those movies later in this video. Speaking of which, in any of these cases, you are rewatching a small subset of the MCU movies, and there are things you will need to review or understand outside of the movies that you are watching or rewatching. So part of the purpose of this video is to go over that stuff so you don't have to go through and rewatch or watch all of the Infinity Saga. For anyone who's wondering, that is all of the Marvel Cinematic Universe movies up to and including Spider-Man Far From Home. Everything from 2008 to 2019. And this way you can be prepared for Brand New Day while only watching 1 to 6 movies. Like I said, the Infinity Saga in Marvel, that's, if you can see up here, you can't see up there super well. That's everything up to here. Maybe I'll do a close-up video of those. The first 3 phases of the MCU, so all of those movies until Far From Home, that's the Infinity Saga. That's all of the movies that are leading up to and very closely related to Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame. Everything since then, so starting with Black Widow, is part of the Multiverse Saga, and that's phases 4, 5, and 6. Now you may notice that Spider-Man No Way Home is part of phase 4 in the Multiverse Saga. Makes sense. There's multiverse stuff going on. So you might be wondering, oh, do I have to watch all of the Multiverse Saga stuff up till that point? That's gonna be several movies and a few TV shows. Or what about the ones between No Way Home and Brand New Day? That's a lot more movies and a lot more TV shows. I would say no. In the Multiverse Saga, all the different projects have kind of become detached from each other again as they're setting up new heroes, as they're setting up new versions of heroes. There hasn't been a big ensemble movie since Avengers Endgame. Of course, before Doomsday, you'd want to, see more stuff. Maybe not all of it, but have a little bit more background. But it's really not necessary to know everything that came beforehand when watching one of these movies or TV shows in the Multiverse Saga, because they're a little less interconnected. Unless it's like strictly a sequel, obviously you need to watch those that came before. Other than that, you might not know like the entire background story of all of the cameos that are showing up, but they'll give you enough information for what the story needs, and you should be able to follow along just fine. Okay, the way I've got this set up is I have this diagram, beautiful diagram again, of your homework before Brand New Day. I know I keep on saying there's not that much homework. This makes it look like a lot. But I'm gonna go through each item in this, and for each item, I'm gonna review what you need to know. And if you are rewatching that movie as part of your preparation, then you can just skip that section of the video. Okay, let's get started. The Avengers. This was not part of the list of things to rewatch because Spider-Man's not in it. This took place in 2012, so it's well before MCU Spider-Man's time. At this point in time, he'd be like 10 years old, 9, 8, something like that. Hasn't been bit by the spider yet. But the Avengers lays significant groundwork for the villain in Spider-Man Homecoming. What you need to know is explained in the Spider-Man Homecoming movie itself, but some background information that is nice to know is that the Avengers movie took place in 2012, and the big culminating climax of that movie was the Battle of New York, and that's when, if you've seen it before, the Avengers, which at that point was just Iron Man, Thor, Captain America, Hulk, Black Widow, and Hawkeye, are fighting against these aliens that Loki sent to Earth. They're the Chitauri. The Chitauri are a powerful reptilian warrior race that are a hybrid between organic beings and a machine. So the aftermath of this battle left a lot of alien tech in New York that needed to be cleaned up. Now on to Captain America Civil War, which is the first appearance of Spider-Man in the MCU. His role was pretty small, and the beginning of the Spider-Man Homecoming movie actually did a really good job of basically retelling that whole background of Peter Parker working with Tony Stark in the events of Civil War in a different new format that was pretty entertaining. So you really don't have to have seen Civil War before jumping into Spider-Man Homecoming. For a little bit more context and background, basically what happened is that Tony Stark, Iron Man, and Steve Rogers, Captain America, were fighting against each other, and Tony Stark decided to get the help of some other people, which included Peter Parker. This happened in the spring of 2016, which means at the time, Peter Parker would have been at the end of 9th grade. Something important to note is that there is actually like a typo, like a big typo in Spider-Man Homecoming that places the events of Spider-Man Homecoming 8 years after the Avengers movie, but that's not actually true. I don't know what happened with the consistency specialists at MCU because they're usually pretty good, but this was definitely actually false and in fact retconned and fixed in the official timeline book. The events of Homecoming take place 4 years after Avengers, so in 2016. So Captain America Civil War took place in the spring of 2016. Spider-Man Homecoming takes place a few months later at the beginning of Peter Parker's 10th grade year. Now, if you are one of the homies or the Spider Stans, you can skip this section if you don't want to re-listen to info about Spider-Man Homecoming when you're rewatching it anyway, or you can stick around if you want. So Spider-Man Homecoming, this is taking place in the fall of 2016. The context here is that Peter Parker has been working with Tony Stark, or at least he did, during the events of Captain America Civil War. He hasn't actually been in contact with Tony Stark since then, though. He's wanted to, but at this point, he's working with pretty small deal stuff in New York, as he just waits to get another message from Tony Stark. Something that's also important to note is that in the MCU, we never actually get Spider-Man's origin story. We know that he was bitten by a radioactive spider, but they didn't really feel the need to retell that story again when there have been multiple movies in the past 20 years telling that story of him becoming Spider-Man. So they kind of just started in the middle of things and never fully went into detail about what happened there. And the main theme of Spider-Man Homecoming is that Peter Parker wants to get involved in bigger things as like an actual superhero, but he's constantly just being able to do little things. And his whole character arc in the film is at the beginning, he is not satisfied with that, but at the end, he becomes happy with just being the anonymous, friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. During the events of Homecoming, we don't actually see Tony Stark very much, and rather Happy Hogan, who you may know from the Iron Man movies, is kind of the intermediary between Peter Parker and Tony Stark. He's the guy who Peter keeps on trying to contact and is in charge of making sure Peter Parker stays responsible as Spider-Man. Fairly early on in the movie, Ned Leeds, who is Peter Parker's best friend, finds out that he is Spider-Man, so he becomes the guy in the chair. I love that aspect of Ned's character, who can help him out with various different things. They even plot to try to use Spider-Man to make them more popular. Doesn't go as planned. But all amongst this, we fall upon the main plot, which is Spider-Man, Peter Parker, stumbling into Adrian Toomes' weapons trade ring. Adrian Toomes has this fancy wingsuit thing, so he is the character Vulture, would he be his supervillain name. And ever since the events of Avengers, he has been stealing alien tech and super powered tech and stuff like that, and creating his own trade of super powerful weapons. Peter tries to figure out what he's doing, thwart his plans, and after a few tries, it finally goes according to plan. Amidst some of the attempts, things go terribly wrong, like an explosion in the Washington Monument that almost kills his friends, but he's able to save them just in the nick of time. Some of the weapons cutting the Staten Island ferry in half, and he has to try to pull them back together. It doesn't go very well. He wouldn't have succeeded at that. And that's when Tony Stark does finally actually show up and say, you've gotten a little bit in over your head, dude. I am confiscating your Spider-Man suit, which is another important thing to note. In the MCU, Peter Parker is very much basically sponsored by Tony Stark. He gets most of his tech from Tony Stark. His main suits, the one that he uses in Civil War and in Homecoming, and then also later on in Infinity War, those were Tony Stark's tech. Peter Parker does try to just go back to normal and not be Spider-Man anymore, but it turns out that his crush, who is the girl he's taking to Homecoming, her dad is Adrian Toomes, the main supervillain. So he kind of just gets thrown back into it again. And it turns out he has a plan to steal all of this Avengers tech that is being moved, since the Avengers are moving their home base from Stark Tower in New York up to upstate. And so he finds out about this plan for him to steal all of the Avengers tech, and he just can't let that slide. So he's able to stop him, and everything's well. And at the end of the movie, Peter Parker gets his suit back from Tony Stark, and like I said earlier, he is happy with just being the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man and decides not to reveal his identity to everyone. Oh, also at the very end of Spider-Man Homecoming, we see that Peter Parker's Aunt May finds out that he is Spider-Man. Another quick important thing in Spider-Man Homecoming, we do have a mid-credit scene that has some significance. In the mid-credit scene, you see someone talking to Adrian Toomes in prison. This guy has a scorpion tattoo on his neck, so he can only be assumed to be a Spider-Man villain from the comics, Scorpion, and he is in fact going to show up later in Spider-Man Brand New Day. Okay, the next step in our little timeline is to review everything before Infinity War in preparation for watching Infinity War. So this only really applies to you if you are one of the Spider stans who really wants to see all of the appearances of Peter Parker in the MCU. If you're not rewatching Infinity War, you can skip this step. Now, there is a lot to review before Infinity War. There's way too much to go over here, so if you are in this boat where you're gonna watch Infinity War and you want a little review before watching it, then I would just recommend looking for some review videos back from 2018 that went over the stuff you needed to know for that movie. Infinity War came out 8 years ago. That is just crazy. And it's not 100% necessary to have to review beforehand. You'll still be able to follow the plotline of Infinity War without having seen all of the movies before it. But just knowing all the characters who are gonna show up and where they're at the beginning of Infinity War can be helpful going into that movie. Now, speaking of Infinity War, let's review the important points and what applies to Spider-Man in this case, in case you are not rewatching Infinity War. The events of Avengers Infinity War happen in the spring of 2018. In the grand timeline of things, this would be somewhere the following academic year when Peter Parker is in 11th grade, sometime in the middle to the end of the year, because this is happening in the springtime. As far as Peter Parker is involved in the plot, basically what happens is that Peter Parker's spidey senses kick off when he's on the bus and he notices a big alien spaceship that's shown up in New York. Well, he decides to go check it out and he kind of gets dragged away into space. He soon finds out that one of Thanos, you know who Thanos is, right? Thanos is the big purple alien guy who is the primary villain of Avengers Infinity War and Endgame, and he's trying to collect Infinity Stones so he can snap his fingers and kill half of the people in the universe. That guy. He has some henchmen, and one of the henchmen showed up in New York because he was trying to get the Time Stone from Doctor Strange. So this is the one that Peter Parker happens upon, as well as Tony Stark. So we've got Peter Parker and Tony Stark sneaking into this spaceship and finding out that one of Thanos' henchmen is trying to get the Time Stone from Doctor Strange. They do end up being able to overpower him and save Doctor Strange, but then they're stuck on a spaceship in the middle of space that they don't know how to steer. It's autopiloting to Titan, which is the planet that Thanos is from. They decide to just let the autopilot run its course, thinking it'll take them to Thanos, or where Thanos will show up at some point, and then they can defeat him there. When they do get there, they end up running into some of the Guardians of the Galaxy, namely Star-Lord, Drax, and Mantis. After a brief scuffle, they realize they're on the same plan and team up to try to defeat Thanos together. See, they're trying to come up with a way to take the Infinity Gauntlet, that is that thing, off of Thanos, so that he will not be able to succeed in his plans after gathering the stones and being able to snap and make everyone die, or half of everyone. They get really close too. Once Thanos does show up, they put up a good fight. But Star-Lord, man, he ruined the plan. They fail, and Doctor Strange does end up turning the Time Stone over to Thanos, which is the second to last Infinity Stone that he needs to collect. And not long after, he is able to go get the Mind Stone from Vision, destroy Vision to get the Mind Stone. Thanos succeeds, and half of the people in the universe turn to dust, including Spider-Man. So Peter Parker is one of the casualties of the snap. Peter Parker turns to dust in Tony Stark's arms, and we will not see him again until the end of Avengers Endgame. I guess that's kind of a spoiler, but I guess if you're watching this part of the video, you're probably not planning on watching Avengers Endgame in preparation for Brand New Day, so I think we're good. Anyway, on to the next movie, Avengers Endgame. Peter Parker is not in the vast majority of Avengers Endgame, but the stuff that happens is very important context-wise, especially as we're preparing for Spider-Man Far From Home. So, as you know, end of Infinity War, half of everyone in the universe dusted. Just immediately turned to dust and died. That took place in the spring of 2018. The majority of Avengers Endgame takes place in the fall of 2023. So between the snap and the majority events of Endgame, there is over 5 years that half of everyone on Earth, not only on Earth, but in the universe, was just gone. The catalyst for potentially bringing these people back is that Ant-Man, who was stuck in the quantum realm for those 5 years, is released because of a rat just happening to click the right button. This creates the opportunity to use Pym particles to do some time travel to get another version of the Infinity Stones to be able to create their own gauntlet that would allow them to snap everyone back. All of that goes mostly according to plan, and they are successful in bringing everyone back, which means Spider-Man is also back. And he joins in the big epic battle against Thanos. And that pretty much summarizes his entire role in Avengers Endgame. Aside from the entire context of the blip, which is the 5 years where a whole bunch of people had dusted and were gone, but then they come back 5 years later. Another important piece of context in preparation for Far From Home is the fact that amidst all this battle, Tony Stark does die. And since Tony Stark was a big mentor for Peter Parker in the MCU, that really hits him hard. And where we find Peter Parker at the beginning of Far From Home is that he is still grieving Tony Stark's death. And now we are on to Spider-Man Far From Home. Spider-Man Far From Home takes place in the summer of 2024. We learn that not only Peter Parker blipped, which is the term for people who dusted when Thanos snapped at the end of Infinity War and thus came back at the end of Avengers Endgame. So not only did Peter Parker blip, also a lot of his friends and significant characters in Spider-Man Homecoming did as well, including his friend Ned, MJ, Flash, and Betty. All of these characters just finished redoing their junior year of high school because they were blipped in the middle of their junior year and they had to start over when they came back in the fall of 2023. Aunt May also blipped, but given that she's not in high school, the 5 years that she didn't age was not as significant as with these characters. So we start Far From Home and it is the end of the school year and Peter Parker and his friends are planning on going on a class trip over to Europe. I'm jealous. Who gets to do that? Peter Parker is romantically interested in MJ and is planning on telling his feelings to her on the trip. He's also excited for a little break from being Spider-Man. He's become content with being a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, but after the events of Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame, and being dubbed an Avenger, and following the death of Tony Stark, a lot of people are looking to him to like take on Tony Stark's Iron Man mantle, not like the actual literal mantle of being Iron Man, but like as like the front-facing main superhero of the Avengers. Anyway, he's happy for the break. He goes on his trip. The first stop on their trip is Venice, but while he's there, he runs into a giant water monster, as well as a mysterious new superhero who stopped that water monster. Can you hear the lawnmower in the background? I hope not. I don't have another time to finish recording this. I'm going on a trip to Europe next week. I'm gonna see the Tower Bridge. Oh my gosh. Okay, you'll see why that's important in a second. Amidst all this, Nick Fury has been trying to contact Spider-Man. If you recall Nick Fury, he's kind of the one who pulled together the Avengers in the first Avengers movie. You know, he had a pretty significant role early on and has kind of been trickling out a little bit later on. He finally just shows up to talk to Peter Parker and says that he needs help with these elemental monsters and gives Peter Parker a gift, which is a pair of glasses from Tony Stark, which have a new AI system that basically can control an entire fleet of weapons. Peter Parker also gets to know this new mysterious superhero who the news dubs Mysterio. This guy calls himself Quentin Beck and says he is from another universe and has come into this universe to fight these elemental monsters. Nick Fury ends up redirecting the school trip to Prague, which is the next spot where an elemental monster is going to show up. Some more fights go down. Peter Parker gets a new stealth suit. His friend Ned dubs the superhero in the stealth costume Night Monkey so that hopefully the friends won't notice that Spider-Man is in Europe at the same time as them. That's a little suspicious. And guess what? MJ notices and she admits to Peter Parker that she has figured out that he is Spider-Man. Before that happens, Peter Parker gives the Edith glasses to Quentin Beck because he really just doesn't want to replace Tony Stark and thinks that there's a better new Iron Man out there and Mysterio could be that guy. But it turns out that the entire thing was a ruse. It was a scam. Mysterio is fake. It's all just this really fancy illusion tech that uses drones to make it look like there's a big monster and that Mysterio is fighting it. Part of the evidence that MJ uses when she tells Peter Parker she's figured out that he is Spider-Man is that she's got a piece of one of these drones that has like the same webs that Spider-Man uses, which supports the fact that Night Monkey is Spider-Man, which means suspiciously Spider-Man has been in the same city at the same time as Peter Parker on multiple occasions, but never actually in a room together. MJ also accidentally activates that piece of the drone and they realize it's got some illusion tech on it and it displays part of one of the elementals, which makes them suspicious. Peter Parker realizes that Quentin Beck is a fraud and needs to get the Edith glasses back from him. They end up in London for a final showdown against a giant elemental. It's an illusion. Anyway, all of the illusion stuff in Far From Home is like really great because there's just like not any other superhero who could have been so successful against these illusions because it's completely messing with Spider-Man's vision. He only sees the illusion, but his Spidey senses can feel what's actually going on. Some of those sequences are really great. This whole final showdown happens at the Tower Bridge in London. Spider-Man is able to defeat Quentin Beck, and Quentin Beck is fatally wounded in the fight. But before Quentin Beck dies, he records Spider-Man as he takes back the Edith glasses and executes all the cancellation protocols. He purposefully takes that recording out of context and says that Spider-Man was behind the whole thing and trying to use the drones for his own nefarious purposes, and posts that online along with the reveal that Peter Parker is Spider-Man. The anonymity is gone. Near the end of the movie, before that video comes out to the world, we also see Peter Parker and MJ admit their feelings for one another and start dating. Another small thing that we see going on throughout the film is we see Peter's Aunt May and Happy flirting with each other. At the end of the movie, when Peter asks if they're dating, Happy says yes and May says no, it was just a summer fling, so that's something they've got to work out. And we also see in the post-credit scene that Nick Fury, who helped kind of organize all the efforts for Spider-Man to fight the elementals, was actually not Nick Fury the whole time. Nick Fury is in space, and this is a Skrull, which you don't need to know everything about Skrulls at this point, but basically they're shape-shifting aliens, and one has been taking the place of Nick Fury. Although in this case, it is a good Skrull, someone who is on the team and who is taking on the role of Nick Fury on Earth, while Nick Fury is in space, and he is aware that that's going on and like kind of, they're working together-ish, except for Nick Fury's kind of actually avoiding stuff on Earth. And that concludes Spider-Man Far From Home. Our next step is not to watch 5 more movies in a TV show, but to briefly review a few characters that it is good to know before going into Spider-Man No Way Home. Now, Spider-Man No Way Home is a direct sequel to Spider-Man Far From Home that takes place exactly where Spider-Man Far From Home left off. But this is where we are going to see some multiverse stuff. Spider-Man No Way Home firmly exists in the multiverse saga, with multiverse shenanigans going on. Homecoming and Far From Home were both very much in the Infinity War saga. Even though Far From Home took place after Avengers Infinity War and Endgame, the main themes were all about the effects of what happened between the blip and Tony Stark's death. But now we are firmly in multiverse territory, and so there are things outside of the MCU that you kind of need to be aware of. There are also some other characters that might be good to catch up on, as they have some more cameos. We've already talked a bit about Happy Hogan. Last we left off with him was in Far From Home, so you probably caught up on him. Also, Doctor Strange and Wong. Last we saw Doctor Strange was in Avengers Infinity War and Endgame, so if you did watch those, then you got that there. The main things to know is that he is a master of the mystic arts, so does magic stuff, and he was the Sorcerer Supreme, who's like the leader of the people who do magic, basically. But because he blipped for 5 years, Wong is now the Sorcerer Supreme and technically kind of the leader guy in that realm of things. One of their home bases is in New York in the Sanctum Sanctorum, which is basically a magic building. It has an interesting layout. And it also has portals to other places. I have a beautiful Funko Pop of Wong right here. Underrated character, I think. I loved that he's been in a few more things recently. And so that's just a few in-universe MCU characters to be aware of. You don't need to know their whole backstory, but just know who they are. Another in-universe character is Matt Murdock, or Daredevil. Now, if you have never seen Daredevil and you've only seen the movies, you might be like, who is this guy? Even as a self-proclaimed Marvel expert, I still have not gotten around to watching the Netflix MCU shows that were coming out like 10, 15 years ago. A bit of context, back after Avengers, the first Avengers, there were several Netflix TV shows that were like, said they were canon to the MCU, but also they weren't like connected with the movies the way like the movies were connected with each other. And so it was kind of, sometimes things diverged a little bit and not everything was perfectly lining up. But we've come back at this point, and they have said that those are indeed canon to the MCU, and now we've seen some of these characters in the movies. One of those is Matt Murdock. So Matt Murdock is a lawyer by day and a vigilante by night. He is blind, but he has heightened senses that allow him to be a superhero known as Daredevil. No one knows, or very few people know, about his secret identity, including like Spider-Man. So when you see Matt Murdock's character in Spider-Man No Way Home, it's just him serving as a lawyer for Spider-Man. So those are the in-universe MCU characters to just be aware of, so you kind of know who they are when they show up. Now some outside of the universe, multiversal characters to be aware of. This movie brings in some characters from the Spider-Man trilogy with Tobey Maguire and the Amazing Spider-Man duology with Andrew Garfield. We are now to this step, to review some characters before watching No Way Home. We already talked about the ones who are in the MCU, so Doctor Strange, Wong, Happy Hogan, and Daredevil. But there's also some outside of universe characters who you need to just be aware of who they are and kind of how they've interacted with Spider-Man before in their universes. So first of all, we've got Tobey Maguire Spider-Man. He's one of the Spider-Men from a different universe. That's all you need to know. There he is. Cool. We also have Norman Osborn, also known as the Green Goblin. You can see a nice picture of Green Goblin right there. He was the main villain in the first Spider-Man movie with Tobey Maguire. And basics are that he has an alter ego, Green Goblin, who's evil and flies around on a thing. Norman Osborn was impaled by his own glider as he was fighting Spider-Man, and that's how he died. Next up we have Doc Ock, aka Dr. Otto Octavius, aka Dr. Octopus. That's this guy. He was the main villain in the second Spider-Man movie with Tobey Maguire. The basics of his character is that he created these tentacles to do things, but then the tentacles have like an AI, artificial intelligence thing in them that like he created a chip to keep them from taking over, but it broke or something like that. It's been a second since I've watched all these since No Way Home came out. And so like the tentacles kind of take over a little bit, and that's what makes him evil. Oh, people should know that he was trying to do something, create a machine that would hold the power of the universe in his hands. Wait, wow.
Sun.
The power of the sun in his hands. And as Spider-Man was preventing that from happening, he fell and died. Is that pretty much it?
More or less.
I'm sorry, it's been a minute since I've seen these. We also have Sandman, also known as Flint Marko. Is that his name? Okay, cool. Gotta make sure. Oh my gosh, I have not seen these movies as much as I have seen the Marvel Cinematic Universe movies. So, he turns to sand. What happened? He fell into a
Super glider.
Super glider, and it made it so he's made of sand now. He was basically a burglar, robber dude, and he was involved in the robbery that caused the death of this Spider-Man, Tobey Maguire Spider-Man's Uncle Ben. So that's somewhat significant. And all he wants to do is get back to his daughter. That's like his entire personality. Did he die? He didn't die. He did not die. Now we have Andrew Garfield Spider-Man. He's from the Amazing Spider-Man movies that came out in 20-something, 14? Something around there. And that's one of the Spider-Mans in a different universe. Kurt Connors is the main villain in his first movie. That's that guy. He's like a science researcher dude. And he wants to perfect the human race because he lost an arm. And so he wants to grow back his arm, kind of like lizards grow back their tails. And so he turns himself into a lizard man. He doesn't die. He gets turned back human. Then we have Electro. Max Dillon, that's this guy. And he falls into a vat of electric eels. And it makes him have electricity superpowers where he can basically like harness the power of electricity and like turn into electricity. And I don't know, his name's Electro, you get the picture. That's what he looks like in his movies. He's the main villain in the Amazing Spider-Man movie, the second one with Andrew Garfield. And he does look a bit more attractive in Spider-Man No Way Home, but it's the same guy. It's just a, costuming and makeup decision that they made. Wait, does he die? He does not die. How does Amazing Spider-Man 2 end again? I just remember Gwen dies.
I can't remember.
If I remember, I'll put some text on the screen here. Quick thing, if you watch the post-credit scene, mid-credit scene, one of the credit scenes, this is Eddie Brock Venom from Venom. He has this black alien goop that turns him into Venom, like that. You don't really need to know that. They never did anything with him. He just pops in and pops out. We're on to watching Spider-Man No Way Home. I am saying that all of you should at the very least rewatch Spider-Man No Way Home before watching Brand New Day. So I'm not going to talk about what happens in it at all. That's your homework. If you want to skip it, then Google it on Wikipedia or something and read the description. Now we're on to this last step, which is review a few background characters before watching Brand New Day. This is just a couple of MCU characters that will show up in the film, so you might want to know who they are, just for some context, even though their significance in the film isn't super important. Okay, we have Frank Castle Punisher. I don't know very much about him because I haven't watched any of his stuff. He's been in Punisher and Daredevil, and now he's finally made it into the actual MCU films. The basics of his story is that everyone died.
His family was
His whole family died.
Was killed.
They were killed.
In front of him.
In front of him, thank you. What else should I say?
That's the very basics.
Honestly, I don't really know much about him, and it was fine. So, you just know who he is. He's been in TV shows before, but this is his first time being in any of the MCU movies. And he basically has lots of guns and does lots of fighting. Okay, this is Yelena Belova. So, you probably remember Black Widow, Natasha Romanoff. She's her, sister, kind of, adopted sister. You can, if you want to know how the dynamic works, then watch Black Widow. Since Natasha died, she's kind of taken up the mantle of Black Widow. So if you hear them referring to Black Widow in the new movie, they're talking about her. Ever since the Thunderbolts, at the very least, she's officially Black Widow now. And I know it's confusing because people are switching their superhero names and stuff. That's Yelena, she's Black Widow. And then lastly, we have Bruce Banner. You probably know who he is. He's the Hulk. He's been in a lot of movies and featured in at least one TV show. I can't remember. You might be a little confused because for a while he was Professor Hulk because he had kind of combined the personas. so that he could still be himself while in his Hulk form. That's not the case anymore. He's back to being normal Bruce Banner, because he has this thing that basically inhibits the hulkiness, and so he stays just normal Bruce Banner now. That's the basics. That's the main thing you need to know about him, where he's at this point in the timeline. And that's it! Anyway, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe, which you can do over there, and click that notification bell in case I do post anything relatively soon. I have not been very active on my YouTube recently. So also, you can check out some other related videos. I've got one about Spider-Man Homecoming from literally years ago up there, and underneath that is a playlist of all my MCU related videos. Thank you for watching, and I will see you guys next time.